Countries have not conducted a census in the past 10 years. That's according to the Africa Survey 2014 to be released by Good Governance Africa in Johannesburg on Tuesday next week. The Africa Survey is a comprehensive annual collection of social, political and economic indicators for the continent's 55 African countries. It says 5 African countries have not yet conducted a census in over 20 years. These are Western Sahara, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Eritrea, Somalia and Madagascar. Only 16 African countries scored above 70%. Now joining us in studio to discuss the Africa Survey is Ms. Georgina Alexandra, a senior researcher with the Good Governance Africa. Georgina, a very good afternoon and thank you for joining us on PM News.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, Georgina, please just give us a bit of background. Tell us a bit about, of course, this course and the survey. And of course, why is it so significant to the African countries?
Well, what we wanted to look at with this specific press release was statistical capacity among African countries, because policy that African governments put into place can only be good as the statistics that inform it. So it was very worrying for us to find that, 16 African countries hadn't actually conducted a census in the last 20 years. A census is something that gives you information about your population, the gender discrepancies between the population, average number of people per household. So if you're going to be looking at trying to alleviate poverty, it's very important to know how many people are in poverty.
Yes.
So in terms of informing policy, we need to get the statistical capacity of African countries up so they're better able to set up better policies to tackle the problems that they're facing.
So basically this means, Georgina, that it hasn't been compulsory up to this stage since some countries haven't done any of the surveys in the past 20 years.
Yes, well, it's very, very country specific. The countries that you mentioned, some of them haven't conducted census for 44 years, Western Sahara especially. But those are also countries that are experiencing extreme turmoil within their own countries, civil war, strife. So in many cases, with the countries that haven't conducted a census in a very long time, it's not due to a lack of will on their half. It's due to other factors such as war. But in other countries, it is worrying to note that countries that have the capacity haven't conducted them. But there are factors such as it's very, very expensive to carry out a census. So those are, and also you need infrastructure. You need people to be able to go out nationwide to the whole country to be able to ask people how many people in the household, what they're earning, who they are, where they're from, that kind of thing.
So it has to come from government, basically?
Basically, yes. But donors would be very happy to help out countries, especially if it's going to produce statistics that will then help them put together better policy.
All right. Now, Georgina, let's get into the crux of things now. From the research done, how is Africa faring politically, socially and economically?
That's a very wide question.
Yeah.
And of course depends on what indicators you're going to be looking at. If we're looking at education, we have seen primary enrollment ratios soaring across the continent, which is very encouraging. But then at the same time, we see secondary education enrollment lacking behind. So only 50% of the countries in Africa have a ratio of 50% of children in secondary education. And of course, when we look at the economic impact of that, if you're not having people in secondary school, they are less able to join the job market and contribute positively towards the economy. So education is obviously a big indicator. And as I said, at primary levels doing quite well, but we need to get tertiary and secondary levels up on the continent.
All right. Now, Georgina, you mentioned that it's a very important thing to actually go through for any country, but what impact does a census like that have on these indicators?
Well, it'll allow us to see what is really going on in these specific countries. So in many countries where you haven't done a census in many, many years, many people say that we're going to be the youngest continent in the next 50 years. But how young and what age groups, where are those people going to be? It's important to know those factors. So that is the impact for policy. If you don't know where your people are, what age they are, whether they're economically active or whether they have education to contribute to the economy through being employed, we need to get better information about that.
All right, Georgina, thank you so much for your time right here on PM News.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, that is Ms. Georgina Alexandra, a senior researcher with Good Governance Africa, talking to us about the very important Africa Survey.